Taxes. We are told that they are the price we pay for civilization, but they could just be the price we pay for really bloated and crappy government. We're going to be discussing the whole concept of taxes today, especially that dreaded narrative of, are you paying your fair share? Because it turns out that if you talk to AOC or Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, we're never paying our fair share and they always need more. But if you stick with us today on this podcast, we're actually going to give you the arguments you need to be able to confront this debate. So we're going to be talking about that and more. We're going to go over some headlines, and we're also going to move into a new version called our Speakeasy portion. And you never know what you're going to learn. You stick around for the Speakeasy session of the show. So all that and more coming up on this episode of Making the Argument, where we make the arguments to defend a free society.
And we want to thank you for joining us today on the show. If you're watching, you can see that we have a new studio. It's pretty great. And all the credit, we have to give the credit to Tina Freitas for building, getting the walls together, the table. It all looks fantastic. But if you're watching on YouTube, you can see that here. If you're watching on audio, thank you as well. Be sure to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen, and drop a comment on the YouTube channel for what you think of the new format.
All right, that sounds good because, I'm a little bit disappointed that he gave all the credit to Tina. I mean, I think I carried this somewhere.
You lifted a few heavy things.
I did lift a few heavy things, but in order to get into this properly, let's go around the room because, again, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you know that we don't always have a lot of guests, but now we have some permanent people that are coming on in order to help with the show. We're really excited about that. First and foremost, my lovely and beautiful wife, former state Senate candidate, homeschool aficionado, and amateur beekeeper, Tina Freitas.
Hello, everyone.
Then we also have our resident historian, and probably, I would argue that within the last 5 years, probably the most accurate prognosticator of election outcomes, Christian Hines.
Thank you. I still got last year's wrong, though. Off by 0.05%.
How humble.
What a loser.
0.05%.
You know what? We expect better out of you, Christian. And, of course, we also have our producer, not only of Making the Argument, but of the Y Minutes of numerous other highly successful programs, Nicholas Hamilton.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Again, you had to be here. You're the producer. Nick, how many times do we have to go over this? All right. So that's the crew. That's the new crew that we have here on Making the Argument. We're actually really excited about this.
Are we?
Well, I don't know. I am.
I'm just happy to be here.
He's just happy he doesn't have to be alone.
All right, so let's go to our first topic now.
Well, a lot going on in the news this week. I think number one that everybody's looking at is Elon Musk taking over Twitter and the WAPO saying that this might be bad for free speech.
So the WAPO is slang for the Washington Post for all of you who are not up to date on the latest in DC media slang. But yeah, Washington Post, whose masthead, or is I'm not going to steal Christian's thunder, but their masthead is "Democracy dies in darkness," or as Christian likes to say, not their masthead, their
mission statement.
Their mission statement. Yeah, they actually changed it to that. I think when Donald Trump got elected,
they did. It was like 2017, like right after he came into office. They decided to slap on all of their websites and articles and everything the tagline "Democracy dies in darkness."
Well, and they're apparently very upset on all of our behalf. They're suddenly incredibly concerned about free speech now that Elon Musk has bought 9.2% of Twitter. Now, interestingly enough, they were not as concerned about Jeff Bezos just completely buying the Washington Post. But, Elon Musk has 9.2% of Twitter, and now they're just losing their minds over there at the WAPO. So does he represent a threat to freedom of speech?
I think they don't understand what free speech is.
It's the speech that the government pays for, right? That's the free speech.
Because it's government-funded speech?
Yeah, it's government-funded speech. You have a right to government-funded free speech. No, I think it's ridiculous. I mean, obviously, this caused a firestorm when Elon Musk one day woke up and said, should I buy some Twitter? And then 2 days later was the majority shareholder.
Not majority, largest.
Largest shareholder. I meant majority of all the shareholders. Yeah. But yeah, he's the largest.
He's got something like 3 times as many shares as Jack Dorsey, the previous CEO.
Well, I think and that's incredible. I think most people, when they saw that he bought 9.2%, they're like, well, what can he do with 9.2%? But as you were pointing out, quite a bit actually, if you have the largest amount of shares, that gives you a lot of power on the board.
Well, I mean, that's why they appointed him. They kind of had to at that point.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is that obviously, you're going to have a lot of people saying, oh, well, 9.2%, that's nothing. That's like third party status if you're talking about elections. But it depends on what sort of coalition he can end up building around that. I mean, Dorsey exerted a tremendous amount of influence over Twitter for many years. He was eventually, he did eventually leave, right? But for many years, he ran the company and, he controlled less than 10%.
Yeah.
So for example, Musk doesn't own outright a majority of Tesla shares, I believe. So it's not that, if you don't have 51%, then you don't have any control over it. I mean, the current CEO doesn't have 51%. So
not even
I think that there's a lot that Elon could end up doing. It's all about, whether or not he can actually leverage that in a positive direction.
I do love the first thing he wanted to do was add the
button.
edit button, which everybody loves.
Yeah.
Except for there's a few detractors because they want whatever you say to be there forever. And I just kind of look at that and go, have you ever heard of a screenshot?
Well, that way they can dig it up like 20 years later and ruin your career because of something you said, in gym class when you were.
But ordinary people just want to be able to correct typos.
Yeah, that's
really
it. Well, and this actually this has been part of a larger debate with respect to the whole how should conservatives respond to big tech censorship. And there's some conservatives that made the whole argument of, well, we need the government to be more involved. Like, oh yeah, because if you don't like it with, Jack Dorsey, you're going to love it when it's Nancy Pelosi. But there was other people bringing up a good argument that was, okay, well, we tried that. We set up Parler, and then Amazon shut down all the servers because they let Donald Trump speak. Well, another free market approach is doing exactly what Elon Musk just did, which is, fine, you got a platform, I'll buy a significant share of that platform, and now I'll put you in a position where you got to make some of these changes we're all talking about. And you're already starting to see some of that kind of come to fruition.
I'm still stuck over here on the fact that WAPO was pearl clutching over free speech dying. And what's interesting is that, Twitter has been known for being in hot water for suppressing free speech. In fact, they've been known for suppressing stories that turn out later on to be legitimate stories, well-documented stories like the Hunter Biden.
I was literally about to bring up
Hunter Biden's laptop. And everybody was putting this out there during election season, and it was getting suppressed. People were getting blocked for it. They were getting getting muted. They weren't able to continue on with their Twitter accounts. And so it's just funny because WAPO acts as though Twitter was this bastion of free speech before Elon Musk, when in reality, I think Christian said something about this being the biggest war is peace. I don't remember what he said.
Or ignorance is strength. It was a very Orwellian headline, but
very newspeak.
Well, and look, we all make a distinction between freedom of speech as a legal category, and then freedom of speech is kind of like a social concept, which is to say that, your freedom of speech enshrined in the Constitution doesn't mean you're free from consequences of your speech on a private platform. Right. But by the same token, the same people on the woke left screaming the loudest about you should be able to say what you want and engage in dialogue would immediately shut down anything that wasn't within that, like those woke categories. And again, to your point, they were actually suppressing speech kind of at some points at the behest of the government. When the government is essentially dragging you in for, to testify before Congress at the same point that they're highly discouraging you to go against anything the CDC might recommend. Okay, at what point are you seeing this collaboration between social media and the wokest elements of social media and the government? And I think people had a lot of legitimate concerns over that.
Well, you saw a lot of that during COVID. I can't remember the polling. There was some polling that was done earlier this year that showed something like close to a majority of Democrats said that they wanted the government to actively criminalize what they thought was disinformation related to COVID. And so going back to what you were saying about free speech, I don't think that some of the people on the woke left actually supported free speech. I think that they supported their speech.
Yeah.
And there's a big difference between those two. And now there's somebody that's actively, engaging with Twitter. I mean, Musk said that he viewed Twitter as a de facto public forum. And I think that's the whole reason that he bought into the company is because he actually wants to treat both sides equally.
Yeah.
And the left is just not interested in treating both sides equally. And you're seeing it in places like Silicon Valley. All of those companies that are headquartered over there, almost every single one of them has overwhelming left-wing bias. It's not even, they don't even pretend to be fair at this point.
Well, we're talking about Elon Musk, who he gets into scuffles with every side of the argument because he calls himself a free speech absolutist. So everyone gets free speech, even the speech that you don't necessarily like. And I tend to agree with him. And I think one of the reasons we are in this position where the left likes to pretend that they're on the side of free speech while at the same time suppressing the speech of others is because there have been times in the past where the conservatives have tried to stop certain forms of free speech that they didn't like. And I just feel like it is such a better position to be in, to want the free speech for everyone, even if it's not even if you don't care for it, because you don't have the freedom. One of your inherent rights is not, oh, I have a right not to be offended. You're going to be offended sometimes. That's one of the consequences of free speech, but it's better to stay free than to have this, because one side that's in power is going to suppress it. I mean, if one side suppresses it, then the other side's going to suppress it when they're in power. And it's just better to leave it open.
Bottom.
Right.
It could be.
Yeah.
I mean, but Musk has kind of taken arrows before. I mean, I can't remember her name. I remember that state legislator in California that was like tweeting all this stuff like F Elon Musk and he's exploiting his workers. And then he replied, "Message received." And then it was like 2 weeks later he announced he was moving to Texas.
I love that.
That was so great. That was a boss move.
I love that.
Well, I mean, even you, Nick, I've seen had free speech problems on various platforms like TikTok.
Yeah.
But what I find to be so interesting is that the easiest way to not get banned is to be as woke as possible.
Yeah.
It's the general thoughts, which are those which get banned and suppressed. And I think people are tired of it.
Yeah.
On Twitter, and I hope that Elon is going to be able to come in here and fix part of the problem. But I think people are tired of many things. And, Christian, you were discussing earlier this week with me about, people in New York City and Chicago and San Diego being tired of the big government policies and woke policies there. Love to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, so there was a report published by the U.S. Census Bureau, I think it was actually 2 weeks today, on March 24th, and basically it was an update on population figures, and what they found was astounding. It was, so for the vast majority of American history, 200 and something years, the trend has always been rural, less populated areas, people moving from those locations to urban or suburban settings. Yeah. And then post-World War II, you had some of the cities like Detroit emptied out and the suburbs around it in like Oakland County blew up. But overall, people have moved from rural settings to urban or suburban settings for 200 years. And what happened in the last, literally, it was 12 months. It was over 12 months. You could argue it goes back to the beginning of the pandemic, so maybe 24 months. Over the last 24 months, you have seen a mass exodus out of most, but not all, of America's large metropolitan areas, particularly the ones that are usually in single-party states. California and New York lead the way. In fact, the number one population loss of any county in the entire country was Los Angeles County. Number two was Manhattan. Manhattan lost almost 7% of its population in 12 months. We actually just did a one.
Yeah, and the reason why that's so incredible is because you hear 7%. You have to understand 7% is a decade's worth of growth in Manhattan wiped out in 12 months.
It's almost 2 decades, actually.
I mean, you got to, and when we're talking about Manhattan, we're talking about, I mean, what's the population number for Manhattan?
Manhattan, now it's just under 1.6 million.
Okay.
It was almost 1.7 million.
But they lost, like New York City lost like over 300,000 people, right? Or was that New York State?
Well, it was kind of synonymous. New York City lost about 3% of its population, just over. New York State lost over 300,000 residents. California lost, I believe, over 200,000. And this is in 12 months.
Yeah. That's the part that people need to really focus in on. Okay, we're not talking about a gradual loss of 7% over 10. We're talking about, again, almost 2 decades of population growth wiped out in 12 months. And you can't chalk that up to the pandemic because there were, now you can certainly claim that, all right, when we have a global pandemic where something is highly contagious, people move out of urban area. I get that, right? But people moved out and then they either stayed out or they waited, they made it through the pandemic and then decided to leave because they just got tired of the garbage. And you didn't just see that in New York, you saw that in Los Angeles, you see that in the Bay Area, and there's a number of factors that go into this, and most of them are politically related. the question that I have, and I think the question a lot of people in Texas and Florida have, is, are the people leaving New York, San Francisco, Chicago, Los Angeles, and going for greener pastures, do they recognize why they're leaving and why they're picking the places that they're coming to? Because this isn't just people retiring to warmer climates, right? These are people that are uprooting their families, uprooting their businesses, and moving to places that are not going to tax, regulate, and micromanage their lives. Are they going to vote that way when they get there? And it remains to be seen, but
it depends on where you're looking at. So like my family, for example, most of them moved down to South Florida. On my father's side, my aunt just moved from Burbank to West Palm Beach. She's a diehard Republican though. So like South Florida is getting redder because places like Palm Beach are blowing up with conservatives that are moving there. Mm-hmm. But the voting trends in Dallas and in Austin are indicative.
Austin is just,
well, that's where all the Silicon Valley companies are locating to. Yeah. So like, we were just talking earlier about, Elon Musk moving from Silicon Valley to Texas. He moved to Austin. Tesla moved its headquarters to Austin.
Well, just outside. Outside so that Austin couldn't have any say over it, which I also thought was great.
But the entire conversation that is taking place in Silicon Valley right now, in Manhattan right now, in Chicago right now, is entirely centered around, why are we still here?
Yeah.
Because the taxes are crushing, the regulations are crushing, the crime rate is through the roof. You're talking about like 80s level crime rates in some places.
It begs the question whether or not there is any self-awareness whatsoever these people have voted these policies in. They have created the environment they're trying to flee from. And do they realize this? Do they have any clue? And when I look at Austin, I would say no. They don't realize it. This is the locust effect. And just like Nick said,
I got in so much trouble for saying that. They're like, you're calling people insane. No, I'm saying that when somebody goes when somebody goes to a particular area, establishes policies, gets everything they like, and then leaves because they don't find it conducive to living anymore, and then they go somewhere else where there's greener pastures and do the exact same thing. At some point, there should be a little bit of introspection.
Well, it's not that people are locusts.
It's
that the policies that are being imposed in states like California and New York.
Right, but the fact that they can't even see that they're the ones that implemented this policy, and they had all these beautiful intentions, and they were so excited that they were, this wonderful woke company that was going to do wonderful things for their employees and wonderful things for their area, and it turns out that their intentions what they did with their wonderful intentions did not yield the results they were looking for. And instead of changing whatever policy it is because they realize that it didn't work, instead they think, oh, well, I'm just going to go somewhere that I haven't destroyed yet. And
so here's where I hold out some hope, right? Because again, I think a lot of the people that are moving right now are. And again, we know a lot of people in California that are leaving, and they're leaving because of the politics. That's one of the things that's different, because every time this happens, pundits always come forward and they try to leverage it for whatever they possibly can. They're doing more and more where they're actually asking people, why are you leaving? And they're saying things like, I can't afford the housing prices and I'm getting taxed to death. But I think that what you're seeing in places like New York, San Francisco, and Los Angeles specific, Cook County is another example, but a little bit differently. It's the people that are in those areas, and they are paying, go look at the tax rates that you're paying in Los Angeles versus, someplace in Texas,
Tennessee,
right? Or Tennessee. Because they're not just paying higher taxes. They're not just paying significantly higher taxes. They then walk outside and there's a homeless person defecating outside of their shop. And when they call the police to come and deal with it, nobody shows up. And then they're told that they're bigots. And they're like, wait a second. The whole argument behind I'm going to pay more taxes and I'm going to be subjected to more regulations was, you're going to provide me a safe environment to do business and to raise my family. And I'm getting all the taxes, I'm getting all the regulations, but I'm getting none of what are supposed to be the results from those things.
Well, because half these people have also pushed to defund the police.
Well, I don't know that we can make that determination from the people that are making an active decision to leave. But
It's
again,
the policymakers.
That remains to be seen, right? That remains to be seen, because you're right. If all of a sudden we're seeing, and look, Austin does have a huge homelessness problem right now because they're dealing with the same sort of policy and political philosophy that they had in Los Angeles. And what we're all desperately hoping is that at some point people make the connection that, look, it wasn't the area. It wasn't the particular person in charge. These policies produce these results no matter where you go across space and time, period.
I mean, I think you've nailed it on the head there. The reason that, that people are leaving, Silicon Valley, San Francisco, the Bay Area, LA, Oakland, Chicago, New York, the reason that they're leaving these places, it's obvious that it's the taxes. It's obvious that it's the taxes and it's the crime. The quality of life has dropped. And when you're paying a 13% income tax at the state level in California, and by the way, New York actually raised their income taxes last year.
Yeah.
So when you're paying a 13% income tax and you're being promised by the politicians that run these states, oh, we're going to have all these public services, your contribution, your 13% taxes are going to be able to fund all these amazing public services. And then, like you said, you walk outside and your store has been vandalized. I mean, it's getting to the point now where people park their cars to go shopping in San Francisco, the stores that haven't been broken into and had everything stolen from them. When they're parking their cars in San Francisco, they're leaving the doors open and the trunk open. So that way nobody will break the windows when they break into the car because they're going to get broken into one way or another. And again, when you're paying 13% income taxes at the state level, that's not even counting the federal government. And you're seeing the crime rate go through the roof and the quality of life just plummet. You've got to be thinking, why am I paying this? Why not move to a state?
When there's alternatives.
Yeah, why not move to a state that has no income tax like Florida?
And now people are starting. People are starting to do some of these, trying to resolve some of these problems themselves. I don't know if any of you guys saw the headline of the guy with the truck in
New Orleans,
Louisiana.
Yeah.
And he set up rigged a flashbang inside of his truck because he had his window broken in his truck, I think 9 times before this. This was the 9th time, I think, they broke the window. And you see it on the camera. This guy they pull up, he jumps out, just gleefully pops the window, starts climbing in, and all of a sudden you see a big flash and he goes running. By the way, as someone that knows a little something about flashbang grenades,
you've got to be seriously pissed to rig up your own car with a flashbang, because that's going to do some damage to your car. That is a person that has gotten to a point where it's like, I don't care if the entire interior of my car gets jacked up. The next person that does this is going to feel some pain. That's what that is.
Well, he said he didn't want to cause injury or he didn't want the person to die, but he definitely wanted to send a message and cause them to have their ears ring for a while.
Yeah.
So while they thought about what they did, I'm sure they just went to the next car.
Well, it's pretty clear to me that the politicians and the folks that are moving to Texas and Tennessee and these other states have different definitions of what a fair share is when it comes to taxes.
What a great transition right there.
So
Nick,
I want to move real quick into our argument of the day being fair share. I've got a couple questions, and I'm going to lay some parameters around these. We've got 3 of them. The first one is, assuming that some taxes are actually legitimate, because we know there are all these programs in these states.
Stop right there.
Christian's already pissed that you suggested the taxes could be legitimate.
We can skip today's whole segment. Taxes are illegitimate.
Fine.
All right, but assuming in some
taxes are actually legitimate.
All right.
What is a fair share?
Well, okay, so this part always makes me mad, and I always tell people whenever somebody says, the rich need to pay their fair share, before you argue with them on anything, the first thing you should do is ask what constitutes fair. Not even a fair share. What constitutes fair? Because when we talk about this topic, if we were to talk about fairness in anything else, like fairness in taking a test or on a sports team, or what would be fair if we were going to all go to dinner, right, and split the check, we would all have this kind of natural inclination to know that, okay, yeah, if we all go to dinner and I order a salad and you order lobster and we split the check, that's not fair to me. I'm paying more, right? But if you pay for you and I pay for me, then we both say, okay, that was fair. We both contributed to what we took out, and there was an equilibrium there. So we paid as much as we were taking out. That seems to be, in most transactions, what's considered kind of like the base level of fairness. Now, I think that makes sense for taxes too.
You pay taxes on what you consume.
It's the idea that, okay, again, going with the idea that there's legitimate functions of government, And so taxes are raised in order to pay for those legitimate functions. Let's assume for a second that we all agree that, okay, the police are a legitimate function. Let's assume that we think the court system. Let's even go so far as to assume that some infrastructure. So, okay.
It really depends on how libertarian you are, though, because
it
there
does.
are a lot of libertarians that
I know.
No,
We're just
absolutely
saying,
not.
We're saying for argument's sake. So the idea would be that, okay, if I'm paying a sales tax, well, then theoretically that involves some sort of transaction. And so you probably used roads in order to get products and service to market, get customers to places. You relied on, a legal system, which would allow you to adjudicate differences in a peaceful manner if you had, contract violations or something like that. So when I pay that sales tax, I'm contributing to the system that is helping facilitate the exchange, right? That's how that argument goes. But more and more the argument has been like, well, no, fair is just you have more, I have less, so you should pay more. And on its face, there's a lot of people on both sides of the aisle that would say, well, yeah, if you have more, you should pay more. And my question is okay, you might be able to argue that from a purely practical standpoint. What makes that fair in the purest sense of that word?
Nothing. Nothing makes that fair. I'm sorry, but you've got a situation where I guess what it is it comes from this mindset of, okay, this person was born with just a blessed life. They're a charmed life and everything's been easy for them and now they have everything. And this other person has a not charmed life and it's through no fault of their own and they have nothing. And that's what it seems like they assume at the baseline. But that's really untrue. I mean, most isn't it? What's the stat on millionaires? How many are first generation millionaires?
It's something
built
it's something like between 60 to 70% of Americans millionaires are first generation.
Well, there's this mental holdover from when we had the aristocracy and nobility and things like that, where it went through the bloodline, and so people just assume that that's still how wealth works, and it isn't.
Well, and I would be far more comfortable, like if someone wanted to say, okay, Nick, I get it. It's not fair, but it's practical that, hey, if you make more money, you're going to pay more in tax. I wouldn't necessarily agree with that, but I would at least appreciate that, okay, you're now making a practical
at least
argument.
Be honest.
You're making a practical argument. Be honest. What I don't like is that, again, fair in every other realm that we typically deal in is you contribute at least as much as what you get out of something. And if you do that, then that's fair. If anything over that, you're now being generous, but that's not how it's actually treated in this conversation.
People get a lot more out of this system than they ever put in. That's not fair either. And
there's two definitions of fair that we're talking about here. It's a trick of the hand, really. You have the actual definition of fair, which I would say is more in line with justice. And then you have the political definition of fair. Well, because the political definition of fair is whatever I say it is.
Yes.
Well, I mean, that's everything political is like that right now. I mean, a woman's whatever some people say a woman is.
But like what I mean by that is that, like, for example, in New York State, the mantra that is coming out of the state legislature there and in the city government in New York is still the rich are not paying their fair share, despite the fact that it's something like 50% of all of the public funding that New York City uses are paid by 1% of the population.
Yeah, who pays for all of that funding?
Oh, it's the wealthy. I mean, this kind of goes into like the other point of, right, who is, so if you can agree that, like you said, there's an actual definition of fair, which is usually associated with I contribute as much as I take out. That's the fairness level. And then there's the political definition of fair is whatever politician needs to say it in order to manipulate you to give them more power in order to take from people, right? But here's what I find fascinating is that it would be one thing if we were living in a system where it was a lot closer to the whole idea of I pay at least as much as I take out. That is not the system that we're living in.
Not even close.
We have an incredibly progressive tax. So I was looking this up, and it was the whole concept of and again, people say, well, why are you taking all this time to defend the rich? Like, dude, I ain't rich. But I do like the idea of truth.
How about intellectual honesty? Let's just go with that.
So here's what it comes down to. So here's the income groups. All right. So the top 1% of the country control 21% of the income, right? But their share of all income taxes paid is around 40%. So there was this argument that, well, of course, to pay more, they control all the wealth. It's like, well, okay, wait a second. If they control 21%, then you would think fair would be they'd have to contribute 21%. And even then, there's some issues with fairness, because at that point, it's no longer about contribution and taking in. You're just saying fair is you make this much, so you got to pay this much, which that even has
It's
problems.
a progressive, yeah.
Yeah, that's even has problems. But that's not even what's going on. If you control 21% of the wealth and you're paying 40% of the taxes, I would think any reasonable person would look at that and be like, okay, yeah, no, they're actually paying above and beyond what their, quote, fair share is when we look at the overall tax rate.
And again, that is why people are leaving. So the mass exodus that is taking place in the Bay Area, LA, and New York,
Yeah.
I would wager that a good chunk of the people that are moving might not actually be actively thinking, man, I'm really moving because the politics here is just terrible. They're moving because they're seeing the bills,
Yeah.
and they're seeing the surging crime rate,
Yeah.
and the complete absence of the public services that they have been promised that they would be receiving in exchange for making those tax payments. And they're adding those three factors up, and they're saying, well, this is ridiculous. I'm leaving. It is too expensive. The quality of life is too bad. The crime rate is too bad. And so I think that on some base level, people understand exactly what you're saying, Nick. But I would wager that they're not necessarily making that political connection, at least at the moment.
Well, no, I think that's accurate. But I think the other thing that is amazing to me is the amount of mental gymnastics that is used, because this has become a purely populist argument, which is completely
Left-wing populist.
Left-wing populist argument that's completely separated from reality. And I saw this General Assembly session because we were arguing about giving tax cuts. Well, we were making the argument that you can't really give a tax cut to someone that is not a net taxpayer, because now you're just talking about another transfer payment. And
it's government spending.
It's government spending, right? A transfer payment is essentially when the government taxes money and then gives it to somebody else based off of like a welfare program or whatever it is. And what was fascinating to me was I started looking not only at who's all paying taxes, right? Because you can make the argument, well, everyone pays taxes because everyone fills out a federal tax form. Everyone pays sales taxes. What shocked me was when you started looking at the transfer payments. And that's where I started to realize that, yes, everybody might pay, like, so in Virginia state income tax, right? Even in the lowest bracket, you're paying, some percentage. And so my Democrat colleague was arguing that, well, this person's paying a higher percentage of their income. So yeah, they only made $20,000, but they paid $3,000 in taxes. Here's what they weren't showing you on that cute little chart they had. They didn't include transfer payments. So they might have been paying $3,000 in taxes, but when you look at all the government money that was coming directly to them, now all of a sudden that was anywhere as high as $7,000 to $17,000. So yeah, you paid $3,000, but you got $7,000 back, or $10,000 back, or $15,000 back. But she didn't count that as income. So here's the crazy part. This is the part you got to wrap your mind around, because this is important. If we did exactly what she wanted, she holds up her chart. She says this person's income was $20,000 and they're not getting any tax cut. And she didn't include the transfer payments. We could have given her everything she was asking for this year, and she could have showed up next year with the exact same chart and said, well, look, they only had $20,000 worth of income.
Because she's not counting the transfer payments.
What about the transfer payments? And this is the part that pisses so many people off, because now you're saying, wait a second, you asked me to pay all these additional taxes in order to help the poor. A lot of people said, I agreed with paying those additional taxes to help the poor. But now when you're keeping score, you don't include any of what we paid as part of their income, because you're sure as hell counting my income. Wait a second, you're sure as hell counting my income when I get a promotion, or I work extra hours, or I sell some property that I bought and saved for a rainy day.
Or how about this? Talk about calling something income that's not income. I think we need to start shedding more light on situations like this. My parents lost absolutely everything in the Paradise fires in California. They lost 2 homes and their livelihood, all of their ability. I mean, everything was gone, leveled to the ground. Yeah. When they got an insurance payment, the government was right there to tax them on the insurance payment to try to rebuild their life. And the government was there with their hand out to take money from them because it looked like income. And these are people who are victims of a massive loss. The government didn't partake in the loss with them, but they sure partook in any transfer of funds on the other side of it. And the payment for the insurance wasn't even enough to rebuild a home in the first place. And then the government took, I think it was 30%. 30%.
Yeah.
So I think we need to start talking about that a little bit more.
No, I think you're right. But I think that is what has made so many people upset, is that even when they agree with the progressive tax system, even when they agree with paying more, and then it comes time for a tax break, and then a politician gets up and says, well, this person only made $20,000. No, they only earned $20,000 through their own labor. They received more money through government taxes, and then you don't count that as income. But again, you count everything I do or everything somebody else does within the productive, sector of the marketplace. You count that as income. There is something seriously wrong about that kind of political math.
So how do we respond to one of the most common arguments that the rich people don't pay their fair share or don't pay taxes?
I think the biggest misconception here, and Christian might have a different opinion on this, I think the biggest misconception between the argument that you hear like, oh, Warren Buffett pays less in taxes than his secretary. No, he doesn't. That's garbage. There are two different things that are going on right here. And usually when this argument is made, there's a general difference between how income is taxed versus how capital gains is taxed. Now, a lot of people, and you see this with Jeff Bezos saying, oh my gosh, he's the CEO of Amazon, but he, only makes this much in income. Oh, well, it's because he's avoiding taxes. Okay, you could say that. Or no, he's making his wealth based off of, dividend payments or selling stock or things like that, and that's taxed differently. Here's the reason why that is taxed at a lower rate than income. So when you're getting a paycheck for doing something, right, there's like a contract there. I get paid to do a job. I'm going to get that money. The government taxes it at a certain rate based off of how much you make, right? So if you make less, you get less income tax. If you make more, you get more income tax. Capital gains, though, is when I've made income. I've been taxed at the full rate for that income. Then I take a portion of that money and I reinvest it in another company. So I've reinvested the money that I've already been taxed on into another company in order to help those people and help myself, right, to make a profit. And then finally, when I get the dividend checked or when I sell the stock, I get taxed again. So that's the proper way to think about it, is capital gains is actually double taxation. But you've got all these politicians running around pretending as if that never took place. And for someone that doesn't understand that distinction, they look at it as, oh, well, these guys are getting over. And it's even worse than that. But I think that's my take on it.
I think that's correct. And another component is capital gains tax. Well, first off, I don't think they should exist. But if they do exist, they have to be at a lower rate than income because it is a risky investment. You're not guaranteed. There's a chance that if I buy a share, if Elon Musk buys 9.2% of Twitter, there's a chance that everything blows up in his face and Twitter goes bankrupt and he loses everything. Mm-hmm. If he took all of that money and he stuffed it under his mattress, I suppose unless somebody lights fire to the mattress, there's no chance that money's going to blow up. Now he'll lose it through inflation.
He'll lose
it through inflation, especially right now. He'll lose it through inflation. Yeah. But there is an inherent risk involved in investing, and it's not just in the stock market. It's in starting a business. It's in
property.
It's in buying property or buying shares of a company or starting your own business.
And
being an entrepreneur,
none of that risk.
There's an inherent risk in engaging in the marketplace, period. And so gains that are made from that have to be taxed at a lower level because there is far more risk when it comes to investing than it is fulfilling the contract, fulfilling your obligations that you signed in a contract, in a regular job.
Yeah.
Well, you're guaranteed at that point. You could sue your employer if he does not pay you. Yep. If you signed a contract and you're being promised $50,000 a year and you're not being paid that, and you're upholding your end of the bargain, you can take them to court and force them to pay you. If I buy shares of Twitter and Twitter goes bankrupt tomorrow, I'm the last one that gets paid. All the debtors get paid first. The shareholders are going to be handed the short end of the stick. And this happens over and over and over again when companies go under.
I think it's funny. The founders would have been really shocked at us even having this conversation.
Yeah.
Because what was it? They originally didn't put anything about an income tax into the Constitution because they were afraid that people would take that as, oh, well, look, we can add an income tax. So they didn't even want to approach the subject because what was it? Who was it?
Well, you had two different arguments. Like at the founding, it was the idea that they were going to raise everything through tariffs, and there was some other nominal ways.
That wasn't what I meant though.
You're talking about when they added
someone proposed
when they added the 16th Amendment.
When they added the 16th Amendment to the Constitution in the early 20th century, the argument was like, well, we're going to put a cap, and I think it was like a 3%. The federal government will not be able to charge more than a 3% income tax. And the people that opposed the 16th Amendment said, you can't put that in there. If you put 3%, they'll take all three of it. Because originally it was, this is just going to be a 1% tax on like the wealthiest Americans.
Can you imagine?
And so they left it wide open. And the end result now is,
can you imagine if our tax rate was only 3%?
Oh my gosh.
What do y'all think the ideal tax rate or system would be?
0.
Okay, again, assuming that there are legitimate functions of government, and so therefore you need taxation to raise
Do a
it.
consumer tax.
I tend to think, and again, let's caveat this. If you add another tax on what we already have, then that's garbage.
No.
You would have to completely get rid of the federal income tax. And then I think the system that I've heard that I have the least amount of problems with, because that's what this is. It's like, what system do you like? None of it.
None of them.
All right. But what do I have the least amount of problems with? If they said basically we were going to do like either just a sales tax or just what they call a value added tax, that would probably be the easiest to administer. It would be the easiest to pay. And long-term would probably be the fairest. Now, what's fascinating is the moment you talk about a sales tax, like, oh, that's regressive. You're forcing poor people. Like, actually, rich people would pay more in a sales tax.
Because the vast majority of transactions take place between business to business, not consumer to business.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the price tag of a yacht is a whole lot more than
Yeah.
Well, most other items.
You would have more progressive results with a sales tax than I think you do sometimes even with the current system where you have all these breaks and you have all these loopholes and everything else.
I mean, businesses would be paying a lot more because at every single transaction when you're getting supplies for your business or when materials for building or things like that, every single point of sale, you'd be paying a tax, wouldn't you?
Well, no, let's be honest about it. So that's more like a VAT tax. That's more like a value added where like each point, whereas the sales tax is mainly just at the retail end.
No. Because there is a retail component of buying things in order to do business, to build whatever you need to build on the end.
I get that. You got to buy before I can buy the house.
If I need 500, steel rods for whatever I'm building, I pay taxes on those rods.
I know, but there's a couple different ways you can arrange that. The point I'm making is this: we need to be really careful whenever we use this language. There's no such thing as a tax a business pays. Taxes are always paid by individuals, period, the end. That's why when the left talks about we need to raise corporate taxes, it's like, oh, okay, you want to punish workers and shareholders.
You want to raise the prices of food that people are getting at the grocery store.
You want to raise prices of food and you want to punish consumers and shareholders, right? That's what you want to do because there's no corporation paying the tax, right? There's individuals paying taxes. The difference is that when you put it on the consumption side, right? When you put it on the sales tax or the VAT side or whatever it is, now you're taxing the person that is ostensibly getting some sort of benefit through the ability to engage in these transactions in a, legally consistent and safe environment, right? As opposed to arbitrarily taxing their income or their property.
I mean, at the end of the day, I will agree to almost any form of tax reform that involves eliminating income taxes. I think that states like Tennessee, Texas, and Florida are ballooning for a reason. And it's because they don't have any income tax. Yeah. And Texas has other taxes that are quite bad. Like they have some taxes that aren't really great for businesses. Like I think they have like one on like gross proceeds or something like that. And
here in Virginia, we have the B-pool tax, which is an absurd tax where you're taxing companies or businesses or individuals on whatever they use to make money. So your computer is going to get taxed multiple times. Every single year you're getting taxed.
Even if your company hasn't made any money yet, which most companies don't in the first couple of years.
Yeah. I have a friend who decided she was going to start spinning yarn because she had alpaca. And her mother bought her a spinning wheel to spin the yarn. And because she sold the yarn at a farmer's market in Culpeper, the government wanted to tax her on this spinning wheel her mom got her for Christmas. Yeah. I mean, that bee pull tax is just absurd. And I've even seen some of the assessors will scan through Facebook and see that you got a new tractor and send you a bill.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's insane.
It gets a little creepy.
Yeah. And we do have a legislator sitting here with us. Nick, can you
why haven't you gotten rid of this yet?
I had a bill this year to get rid of the bee poll tax. And somebody described it as, well, the bee poll tax is a tax we have for kind of the privilege of running a business. I said, stop right there.
The privilege.
If that doesn't express what is so wrong with this tax, that you would people run businesses in order to provide goods and services for other people that want them to mutual benefit. And we're saying you got to be taxed for that privilege?
It may be a privilege to be able to work for a business owner.
Like, oh my gosh. Well, look, let's wrap this up because we got to move on to our next segment. But it's really important that, again, all of our viewers that are listening to this, so what is the argument you use, right? When somebody is talking to you about this, when you hear a political ad, when your kid comes home from college at Berkeley, what are you saying? Well, the first thing, again, when they come in and they say, oh, the rich don't pay their fair share, or we need to raise tax on the rich, the first thing you need to ask them is, what do you mean by fair? Because if they can't define that for you, this isn't a serious conversation. Because the moment they say, well, it's this, and then all of a sudden that doesn't raise the revenues they want, and they say, well, now a fair share is this. No. You either give me a standard by which we can judge what fair is, and then you need to test that standard by how we use that term in every other area of our life. Because as Christian pointed out, they might want to use a political definition of fairness. Tough, it doesn't work that way. So that's step one. Always nail them to the carpet, nail them to the floor on what does fair mean to you, right? And then make them express that. And you can usually show the problems that they use. The second thing that you need to attack is this whole idea that the rich don't pay their fair share. I'm sorry. By any standard of fairness that we use in everyday conversation, not only are they paying a higher proportion of what they actually control as far as wealth, or a higher proportion of what they control, but they're paying over and above it. And when you take into account transfer payments, and this is really, really important, right? When you take into account transfer payments, right, the poor in the country are generally speaking, receiving more from taxes than they're actually paying into it. So if your goal is a progressive tax system, congratulations, you got it. But at some point, and this is the final point you want to make with them, right? Because if you can demonstrate that even after all the tax breaks, even all after the loopholes that they might not like, the rich are still paying a much higher percentage of taxes. The third thing you need to go to is, how do you expect to raise the taxes to pay for the things that you want if you're not actually going to be honest about who's paying taxes, the degree that they're paying taxes, and then asking the all-important question of, okay, if you're actually already getting what you claim to want, why isn't it producing the results that you want? Because that actually takes the conversation in a whole new direction where we can actually get away from this whole idea of that the government has some sort of inherent right to what you earn, and then go into, how are they actually spending what they're already taking? Because if it's not achieving what you think those taxes should be achieving, well, that's a different question, and that's one that should be directed at the politician, not the taxpayer. Hope that helps. All righty. Oh, sorry. One other thing I want to add with this, and every
You've
time
got some recommended reading for us, right?
We got some recommended reading for this. So if you want to learn more about that, there's a couple sites that I find that provide really good data. Christian might have some other ones on this as well. Tax Foundation is really good because Tax Foundation doesn't just provide you a bunch of data and like academic papers on this. They provide you a lot of charts that are easy to understand. They actually have some courses they'll go through that will explain everything from the different types of taxes you pay, right? You pay taxes on income, you pay taxes on sales, you pay taxes on property. They kind of break all that down and describe how it works and what are some of the perverse incentives for some of these systems. Another one is Heritage Foundation. They've done some great work on breaking down the federal budget and how your taxes are collected and spent. And then American Enterprise Institute has some of the best charts I've seen on really showing the transfer payments. And I think that's I can't stress that enough. If you forget everything else we've talked about, understanding the transfer payments are important because every politician that is telling you, oh, look, this person pays a higher percentage of their income, I will guarantee you they are not including government transfer payments as part of their income. And that is a horribly intellectually dishonest argument. And really what it is, it's a smack in the face of everyone else that is paying taxes. So Tax Foundation, Heritage Foundation, American Enterprise Institute. They all have some great ones. You got any other ones?
Mercatus was.
Oh, yeah, Mercatus. Yeah. Mercatus out of George Mason University. They got some good ones as well. All right. So I guess we're moving on to the speakeasy portion.
I want to hear Tina talk about her bees.
What? So I fed my bees
what's
this
the buzz?
morning.
Oh, my gosh.
Well,
we throw something at him?
We've been talking this whole episode about, government regulations and overreach. I'm interested to know if you've learned anything about the bee industry and like raising bees, of any crazy government regulations.
Or if you want to hear about a bunch of authoritarians, we can talk about bee culture too. Jeez.
Oh, let's do it.
The bees themselves.
Yes.
Right. The hive mind. Well, first of all, one of the questions that I get asked about my bees is whether or not I participated in the program that Virginia has to provide free bees and free hives to people that are willing to keep them. Because one of the issues is that bees, obviously, they're incredible pollinators, and we need to have them. They're very important for our environment, and so there is government funding toward trying to save the bees, and
I didn't vote for it though.
So people will get their hives for free, and they will get their bees for free, but they do have to. I believe there is some government regulation involved in that, and you do have. You are supposed to call. I can't remember the name of the place, but
well, look, before I get angry emails talking about what a hypocrite I am, we didn't use any of the government subsidies.
Okay, so my point was, I get asked whether or not I took advantage of that. No, I did not. I have been wanting to keep bees for a really long time. I love honey. I love bees are just incredibly fascinating. I can watch a million bee videos because they're
What'd you think of the Bee movie?
Oh my God.
It's horrible. It's absolutely the Bee movie. Okay, I won't get off on this tangent. The Bee movie is awful.
Well, okay, wait a second. No. I want you to explain.
Okay, hold on.
Why it's awful.
Okay, first I will say I got my hives for Christmas.
Yeah.
Nick got me my hives for Christmas, and I got my bees from Beta Loca downtown in Culpeper. And Felicia is the one who provided my first grouping of bees. I get a 5 nuke batch of bees at the end of April from another local beekeeper as well. Anyway, I'm starting with 2 hives. Hopefully we are successful. But the bee movie is terrible because if you know anything about bees, you know that the boy bee that's running around, doing all this stuff doesn't exist. Everybody who works in a hive is female. They are all female. The males are what we call drones, and the only thing drones do, they don't even have a stinger. They don't defend anything. They don't go gather food. They don't have the little pollen baskets on their legs to go. They don't do anything. They go up and they buzz around the tops of the treetops looking for a virgin queen to mate with. And that is his entire purpose. And so that literally he eats, he poops, and he looks for a queen to mate with.
Can I just say that would have made a horrible children's movie, but I'm not surprised if Disney comes out with one that's more
It's
accurate
not
now.
surprising, right?
Yeah.
But it is ridiculous. Drones do look different. They have bigger eyes. They've got a more rounded backside because they don't have a pointy stinger. Anyway, you can actually handle a drone and they can't hurt you. And so it's kind of fun. But that's pretty much their whole purpose. The females actually kick them out of the hive as winter approaches because they are useless to the hive, and all they are is an extra mouth to feed. So all the men get kicked out. It's the
die in the winter.
ultimate matriarchal society.
Yeah.
That's why Tesla said that the future is the bee.
Oh my God. Yeah. Stay tuned for the next Disney movie, like the real bee movie, like Matriarchy, where like all the men suck and they all die and all they're there to do.
But it's crazy because I can't imagine anything worse than giving birth for the rest of my life as my function. Yeah. And that is all the queen does. She actually only gets mated 2 to 4 times, like somewhere around 3 times in her whole life. That's what the drone did.
Try to keep this family friendly, Tina.
Oh, sorry. And then she goes in and she lays eggs for the rest of her life.
They probably won't feature that portion on the new Disney movie.
Well, and didn't the bee guy like fall in love with a human?
Okay,
I'll admit,
That sounds very
I never
Disney
actually saw the movie.
at this point.
well, no, the crazy part is, and when we first went down to Beta Loca and Culpeper, and it's pretty cool because she actually has a hive in the store with a glass frame, so you can actually it's a
an
viewing hive or observation hive. So you can actually look at that, and it's fascinating to watch. But the more you learn, the more you're like, these guys, like whenever you hear people talk about oh, if only we could work together as a connected hive. I'm like, you mean one where the dudes get thrown out in the winter and basically starve and freeze to death, so the queen can spend her entire life, and the women can work until they die. Like that's the hive mentality you want.
The way that
it actually does sound a little bit like communism.
I was going to say, it
actually
sounds like the Soviet Union under Stalin.
It actually really is. And the reason why is because bees are, so there is this misconception that the queen basically is the hive mind and she tells everybody what to do. She does not.
Yeah.
She's actually a slave to everybody else. But they all are, their whole function is to make sure the hive, the community survives. So they sacrifice their own lives for it. They do everything they can. They live about 45 days unless they're overwintered, then it's longer. And the queen can live about 3 years. And so their whole function is the continuation of the hive itself. And so there is no individualism there.
It's all for the collective.
It's very much, but the problem is that it's not like communism, because communism disincentivizes people to work and help and do things like that. So that would be, if they were like communism, they'd be just like hanging out eating the honey and.
What would happen?
They wouldn't have any honey.
The queen would hoard whatever honey was left, and then randomly kill workers if they
and then ultimately we
didn't
have
produce
no more
enough
bees.
honey, and then they would blame drones for it.
But there are some very hotly contested debates back and forth with various portions of the bee community.
That's been the most fascinating thing for me, is sitting back and watching the factions within the bee community, especially dealing with mites and should you use essential oils versus should you actually treat with pesticides.
There is a bee group that I'm a part of and I'm just an observer right now, so I just kind of stalk the page. But I love reading all of people's experiences. But in the group rules, when you become part of a group on Facebook,
when you become part
oh
of
my god, Christian with the puns.
I know,
man.
right? He's so punny.
Oh my.
I just totally derailed everything.
This whole thing is going downhill
Oh my
quick.
gosh. Well, anyway, one of the issues is they said any mention to using essential oils or naturalistic methods for getting rid of mites on the bees will cause you to be banned from this group. I mean, immediately, post taken down, banned. That's how serious they are about
They
it.
will straight up Jack Dorsey you. If
That's
you,
right. But then the other side is like,
wait until
oh,
Elon
no.
Musk gets a hold of that bee.
But then the other side will say, oh, you're using a pesticide to kill the bug on the bug. And when you say it like that, you're kind of going, ooh, that's risky. So it is.
So you're
really threading a needle here.
So here's the question everybody wants to know: if you have a hive of bees, how much honey are we talking?
None yet.
I'm not talking about right now. On average, what can we expect for our return on investment in honey currency?
Honestly, I am not sure, because most people do more than one hive.
We're doing two.
We'll be doing two. I'm not sure if we'll actually get honey this year, because you do have to save enough honey for the bees so that they can survive the winter. So
how many hours
you
do you
only
have to
take
spend
what's
with them
extra.
a week?
Not very much.
Yeah.
No, I right now I have to feed them because it's a new bee package and they need to be fed because they're building out their comb inside. And so once they're done building that out, I can probably remove the feeder around June.
What does a new hive of bees eat?
Well, it's literally 1-to-1 parts of sugar and water.
Oh, that's why you had me picking up
Nick went and got me
colossal bags of
ton
sugar.
of these gigantic bags of sugar from Costco. But yeah, we got to do that.
So the other day when I gave him Sweet and Low, that was not.
You didn't give him anything. I'm the only one with a bee suit in this household, and so I can't ask anybody else to go and do anything. I have not been stung yet. I can't believe it. I was expecting to get stung.
I feel like that's kind of I don't know. I'm just going to be honest, babe. I'll have more respect when there's some stinging involved.
Okay, well, I'm also really careful because I suit up every single time.
I can't believe the TikTok videos because we were sitting there watching either YouTube or TikTok, and it's that one gal, I can't remember her name.
I can't remember. She's like,
These bees. And she's going there
bees.
finding bees that have just like randomly taken over a house. And I want you to imagine pulling off the ceiling, and it is nothing but like honeycomb
She's like,
and
"These
millions
bees
of
were-
bees.
these
And
bees
she's
were very
grabbing them with
friendly."
her bare hands and putting them in a box. I'm like, no,
She goes,
no.
They were docile. They were very friendly, and I was holding the bees, and I'm just going, wow, lady. Okay, we'll see about that. Although here is a crazy fun fact that I don't even know if it's a fact yet. The jury's still out on it, I think. But you know how big pharma doesn't like to explore anything natural with how to deal with issues. But there is a treatment. It's a bee stinging treatment because the poison in the little sac on the stinger apparently has something in it that counteracts arthritis and rheumatoid arthritis. And so they actually have treatments they do on their hands. So I told my mom, because my mom has really bad
So you're going to
arthritis.
sting her with it.
I said, Mom, I heard about this. And she goes, so are we going to sting me when I get there? She's coming to visit in May. And I said, I think I would rather professionals take care of that. I'm not going to do it.
Well, I just want to know what Dr. Fauci thinks, because I know whenever I'm
Mr.
considering
Science himself.
any sort of medical treatment, I always consult the
We
science.
better find out what
The
science
sci-
says
the
about
science. Yeah, when the science is not around, I just
Well,
don't know what to do.
I'm so glad that he's falling off the news right now.
this. Oh, he's desperately
desperately
trying to claw his
trying
way
to
back.
get back on.
He keeps going, hey, maybe some lockdowns, you guys. There's this other variant. It might. We don't even know that it got to another person because the symptoms are so mild. But we may have to do lockdowns for this. You won't even know that you have it.
Well, on that note, I know I am horribly terrified of anything that could be so horrendous that I wouldn't even notice I contracted it. All right, well, that is all the time that we have on this episode of Making the Argument. I want to thank everybody for joining us for this conversation. As always, Tina, Christian, Hamilton, well done. I'm very proud of all
Thank
of you.
you.
Thank you.
By the way, make sure you like, subscribe, and share. If you like what we're actually doing here, if you like the topics, if you'd like to see us continue to do it, then liking, sharing, and subscribing is one of the easiest ways that you can help us out and make sure that we are around here for many more years in order to make the arguments to defend a free society. I'm Nick Freitas with Making the Argument, and we'll see you next episode.